You're tuned in to RX Radio.
So what is it? Banded what?
So it's like it's the is it AD? No, it's abduction machine.
Yeah.
Okay,
Abduction.
right. So that would be that would be the bad girl machine.
Yeah, no. Well,
No, AB is out.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the
Look,
slutty
man.
girl. Yeah, it depends
the
on
bad
what you're
good
looking
girl
for.
would
Open
be
and welcome.
Yeah,
Doris. Yeah, 7-Eleven in that shit, 24/7.
So yes, it's the bad girl.
Okay.
Bad girl, and then you take a band, you place it around your back, so it's like mid-back, mid-thoracic,
Okay.
and you put it over the machine.
What do we do? Well, okay. So hold on. Where's the line of pull? It increases tension
In your torso, so it's creating it's the torso angle essentially is there.
So it's
you're
pulling
creating
you forward,
Yeah,
or it's
so
causing you to go into like torso extension.
torso extension. So you're
Now, I think is the reason here they think torso spinal extension and hip extension are the same thing? Is that the thing?
I
JC,
think
I
at the
any
end
thoughts?
of the day, I think at the end of the day, the justification is it feels harder.
yeah,
Yeah.
I feel more.
But I
moves
mean, that probably
somehow.
drives most things. I think the logic behind it is, it's greater glute activation.
Oh boy, there it is.
Yeah.
There it is. That's the old
There you
glute
go.
activation thing.
I'm trying to find it. So
Yeah,
so
I
we
mean,
can-
so you could make a case for. I mean, maybe there's a broader conversation at play here, which is I'm all for muscular co-contraction. I'm all for stability, and I think if there's something that I maybe not set out to do this when I went on the internet 10 years ago, stability is slowly being a thing that people are being just coerced into having to believe in, even though it's not the fucking tooth fairy. So more people are using that language, but I feel responsible slightly for curtailing the conversation when it goes too far. Because in this case, if I understand this correctly, the idea or the mechanism would be increase spinal extensor tone, stabilize the pelvis internally, stable pelvis, stronger glute contraction. Let's just give the devil its due and say that's what
it's essentially like that, except there's someone holding it,
Okay.
and this is a slightly different.
Okay, so
the whole
that to
pump
me,
thing,
that
I
to
don't
me
know
is
what-
silly
Yeah,
because
that-
that's tantamount to like the. For those of you guys who are not watching what we're seeing here, like when I see people doing seated good mornings for glutes,
Yeah, I think it
right?
yes.
Like that spinal extension, even though the hip is going from a relatively flexed position to not, or like flexed and extended position, it's not a glute exercise.
Apparently, it is.
There's no way.
Well, apparently
Right?
that's
Like
they
that
feel
would
more
be.
glute.
So in my case with that I think has more merit than a seated good morning as a glute exercise.
So the only reason I would agree with you on that is they're probably being able to, and if you watch all of them, they brace through their lats better
In which?
in all of these. So they
sure,
land
sure.
up because they're now having to resist the force of being pulled forward.
Yeah.
They're resisting through their lats, so essentially they're stabilizing their pelvis better. They probably feel a slightly greater contraction.
My thing with that is if
I
we
think-
kind of know that at least with the glute max, you're probably better off being in a stacked position. And then with the band pulling your torso forward, you're now creating a co-contraction that's pulling you to an anterior pelvic tilt. If you let the band do what the band's going to do, but then as you stabilize, hopefully you don't extend back into it. But I'm seeing a lot of extension there. I think there's like maybe an actual episode to be pulled out of this rather than just us
Just
breathing
us.
heavy into dumb shit on the internet.
And I can't find it, and I can't find the chick who was doing it again. Oh, I sent it to you. Hold on.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Forensics.
Hold on.
Forensic DMing here.
Yeah, I'm still-
My thing would be when muscular co-contraction goes too far. As someone who talks a lot about the principle of internal stability and how, higher stability, higher output, all that crap that stemmed basically from these three mouths on this podcast. So whenever you hear that, it's like, well, we all know where that kind of came from. I feel responsible partially to rein that in because increase in muscular co-contraction, when it becomes not a co-contraction, when it becomes the dominant force output of the exercise, has then changed the bottleneck of the exercise, right? Like I'll make this argument until I'm blue in the face about the hip thrust. It's like, well, the co-contraction required to maintain the pelvis position necessary to utilize the glute max as the extensor of the hip oftentimes is the bottleneck to the exercise to begin with. So the co-contraction is not the co-contraction. The co-contraction actually becomes the glute contraction.
Yes.
The glute contraction in a hip thrust in a lot of cases is contraction, and the primary contraction is the relative neutral pelvis position you need to adopt, external oblique, rectus abdominis, TVA, what have you. So that's kind of like my big extra grind is like people got on board with the stability thing. Thank you. That's how your body works. Great. But in doing so, they've gone too far. And then in looking to, in this case, I like the idea of the constraint being prompting further internal stability to a certain degree, rather than like think 10 years ago, you know what that was? Rather than a band pulling them forward, a seat belt holding them down. Right. So we've gone from understanding external to going into internal, but we've gone too far as we do, right? Like as the industry does. So
we try to correct it by going
massive overcorrection. Yeah. But I think that's what we're seeing here. And that's like true of everything. Like every exercise that when you look to stabilize it further, you end up, or even over cueing an exercise. Pec fly would be an example. Use your upper back a little bit to get your scapula's in a position so that your humerus can get into a little bit more extension. Great. But don't fail in your upper back. It's a chest exercise, right? But like when the intent of the co-contraction is like rhomboid squeeze, it's like, no, it's still the co-contraction means like secondary on the list. And a lot of times people expend too much, not a lot of times, but I'm seeing the pendulum shift now towards like, oh, I get it. Internal stability works and is scalable and allows me to generate increasing amounts of force output over time. But then they lean into that. It's like, well, no, you still want the primary thing to be the primary thing.
Yeah.
That's my 2 cents on it. I think that's where that exercise, that's the thought process that's, if there is, and who knows, maybe we're overthinking something that no one thought about.
We're 100% overthinking it, and someone just wrapped a band around it to just, that's why I don't know why else you would think that, because the people I've seen it on are not smart enough to think the way that we've just broken it down.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it's going by feel, but, so's a blind guy walking down the hallway. And I don't want him to train me either. Sorry, no offense. I don't know. That if I had to give strong man the argument, I think that's what they're doing. And again, I think it's a step in the right direction where 10 years ago in most gyms, you would have seen the seatbelt going around the waist. Now, rather than having a line of pull sinking you back, you're having something to pull you forward.
So you have to intentionally resist what's the force from that.
But
side.
To me, I would compare it because there's 2 ways to look at it, right? Like a teaching tool, like a band around a barbell. Well, so I'm thinking about a band around a barbell for a deadlift.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a good teaching tool for someone who doesn't know how to use their lats. So they're going to follow this train of thought online. When people are first learning how to hinge and you want them to keep the barbell close to them and use their lats to extend their shoulders, stabilize their pelvis, all that stuff, you put a band around the center of the barbell and you pull it away from them. So then they have a vector in which to extend their shoulders against, and they feel it roll out in front of them. So they use their lats and pull it in. And subsequently, as they do that, lumbar spine gets stabilized by the lats. Great. But that's a good teaching tool when we're practicing a skill, right? At heavy weights, when you're a proficient deadlifter, I wouldn't recommend adding that, because what you're going to do is you're going to decrease load. Sure. Yeah. But I guess what I'm saying is, in this case, you're probably better off, maybe you do that for a set for someone who you're trying to stimulate that co-contraction for, who maybe adopts a bad posture. But the thing is, when we look at exercises between 2 buckets of skill and output, 2 endpoints on a gradient, that's probably a better way to put it, where every exercise, depending on its external environment, will have an increase or decrease on the internal demand to stabilize according to that external environment. So how bad of a coach you must be that you need to use, or how dumb an athlete you have that you need to use something like a banded tactile cue to reinforce a position on a machine where 93% of your body is covered by some sort of external reference point is pretty shocking to me.
Yeah, it is.
But when a deadlift, you're kind of out there, it's just your feet on the ground. YOLO, you're freebirding out there. You don't know what. So sure, that I understand that case.
The complexity of the skill requires the necessary intervention if we were in the very beginning stages to learn that skill.
Yeah, because it's a skill that is a skill.
Yeah,
Like
correct.
seated abduction, like
It's not.
it's like a dead cat on a treadmill. Its legs are still going to move. Like you could be 2/3 retarded. You could still figure out how to fucking fan your legs out. Like that's pretty easy.
Yeah,
So
again, you can be the bad girl very easily.
Yeah, and by the
It's pretty
looks of some of these girls, they'll never meet my mother.
No,
But I'm just saying, like, it's something where, like, if you understand where that's necessary, because here we have a band in, let's identify 3 use cases. The band as a tactile cue for a deadlift and teaching how to keep your lats engaged, versus the band around the waist on an RDL to like reinforce a hinge and like slightly overload the glute at the top. And then the band on this abduction thing to co-contract the spine. Same band, varying degrees of utility, right? So like the deadlift one we talked about, not bad, right? Conventional deadlift, you want someone to train their lats effectively, put a band around the center of the bar, slightly pull the bar away from them. They'll feel how their lats need to extend their shoulders. Subsequently, their lumbar spine will stabilize. Yay, no problem. Second one, banded RDL. Right? So maybe you're trying to either teach someone how to hinge by pulling their pelvis back. And I would argue that your best way to do that is not by having a band pulling from behind them, just spoon feeding them that position, is do like a rope hinge where the center of mass will teach them how to move appropriately. Right? So if I do a rope hinge and I have someone hold a rope and it's attached to a low cable stack and I walk them back, intuitively they're going to want to move their pelvis back because their center of mass is being pulled forward, right? So I'd rather teach them with a hinge that way, because that just leaves like a little neurological trail of breadcrumbs to be like, hey, don't fall over. And our body really prioritizes things around not falling over, which is funny because, like, I mean, Pat Davidson, friend of the show, he has this idea of like ground, and I'm not going to have a go at him while he's not here, but maybe we'll have him on the podcast, because like ground is basis support, right? Basis support is missing a component, obviously center of mass, and those two things come together. And then there's a lot of language around people who don't like the word stability. It's like, just fucking use it, because that's what it's there for. And the idea is stability is the likelihood of how likely something will fall over. That's the argument. And it's like, hold on a second. That's a big fucking deal. As a biped human being, that's the reason we don't walk on all fours, right? Because our brain has figured out a way to not fall over walking on, like, you watch like a dog get up on its hind legs and do like 3 or 4 steps, right? We figured out in our brains
that we can.
how to automate processes to make that happen. And at no point do we start like topple over. So it's like, look, dog, like, let's talk about how important that is, and let's not glaze that over and be like, hey, stability is just the likelihood of something falling over. It's like, yeah, that's fucking important to not fall over, right? So when I look at, the second hinge, where it's like, all right, we looked at the deadlift with a band pulling the bar away from you, good motor learning tool. The band pulling your hips away, probably not the best motor learning tool. And if you know how to skillfully load the movement of an RDL, use more load, right? Use more load, and don't take the weight off and fuck with your center of mass, only to have a weak glute contraction at the top and a weak like hamstring contraction at the bottom of the movement. And then the final one is the one we're looking at now, which is like, okay, there's probably a verbal cue could probably get them to co-contract to the amount necessary to get the same output without diminishing and increasing fatigue globally by trying to have this other task you're trying to perform at one time.
Well, that's kind of what, I was going to say, the whole point is like, why do you need the band? It's like you don't need an increase in co-contraction in that exercise, because it's the same thing as if we're doing here and pulling my legs out.
Yeah. I mean, you could argue that like superimposing internal and external stability to be useful, but you only need the amount required that you can create against or without any resistance.
Yeah.
So when I look at that, it's like Rubik's cubes are hard.
Yeah.
For me, I'm assuming. I've never done one. Yeah. But it's like, I don't know. Do you know all the 50 states?
It'd take me a minute to say them, but I could probably get through it.
No shit, actually? I'm impressed. I have no idea. I could maybe get through like half of them. Can you do them in alphabetical order?
Fuck no. I didn't learn that song.
I didn't know if there's like some Pinky in the Brain song or something.
I mean, there is a song that they taught in like elementary school to run through them.
Yeah, it'd be like Alaska, Alabama. And we're done. That's all the time we have for today. But it's like, okay, saying the 50 states or like the alphabet, right? Like the A to Z should be pretty easy for all of us. Rubik's Cubes are hard. If we introduce the Rubik's Cube while saying the alphabet becomes more difficult.
Correct. The
Right?
complexity of the task at hand is
Right.
increased.
And that's kind of like the hip abduction machine is saying the alphabet, and then introducing this ridiculous band pulling you on your face is like introducing the Rubik's Cube. It's like, dog, just say the alphabet. Like, you don't have to take in this thing with a gun to your head and start fucking it around. So, yeah, and it's funny because bands, like everything else, just get cross-applied. And in some places they're super useful, in some places they're completely useless or counterproductive.
Yeah.
Right. So I would say in a case like that, if you have, and maybe we have clients like this. It's been a while since I've had a client like this, but someone who doesn't even know how to internally stabilize on the machine. And you're like, no, like this is the general feeling you need to have in your back while on this machine to maximize output. And you do it for like 1 or 2 reps. You got it? Okay, you good? Great. Moving on. And take the fucking thing off. Because the thing is, like, I look at like an energy reserve on a set, like a battery cell in my brain, and watch how quickly are they, and this comes down to like breathing. Like, people don't know how to breathe through a set, and they take a breath on every repetition on a machine. It's like that battery cell in my brain, as I watch them go through a set, they're fatiguing way too quickly because they're expelling too much energy, and for a system that they don't really need to replenish that much, right? You don't need a big breath of air to stabilize your spine when you're on a machine. You don't need it. Right, that's what the rest of the machine is for. So, or when I see this case of like, you don't need supraphysiological pelvic stability while you're sitting on a machine, so you don't need to have this band, and you're depreciating or depleting that energy reserve for the set. So you're likely not approaching the threshold to failure necessary to stimulate hypertrophy. That's kind of my take on it.
I would agree.
In that though, I want to highlight a point that I think often gets lost in the lack of thought process in it, that you used an example of where it could be used for a rep or two and take it away. I feel like people stop at that point of just add but never take away, because a lot of times in our industry people fall into stimulation or sensation instead of stimulation. We see a lot of feel based making the decision in how we're going to perform or how we're going to attempt to execute. And so there's never really that secondary step in removing the band because we gave them the sensation that they're looking for. Now let's take that Band-Aid off and try to pair that with the stimulation of execution. But I think that's a similar conversation or a similar approach that goes into when people step too far from the benefits of stability, that they're just putting in stability to try to create a stimulation, thinking that is going to, or that sensation is going to create the same or a more beneficial stimulation to it, whenever it's really just limiting their ability to perform if it's better performed more externally stabilized so they can drive a higher volume. Because I look to this conversation and think the next step in the thought process of that band, like, it's not very far different from standing up on that machine too, that we see a lot as well.
When you do the like half squat type of variation.
Yeah, because in that, now, thought process, I have to stabilize. I'm using stability, but like, that's the bastardization of stability, that it's not. It's better to get off if stability is supposed to be the driving force. If we're looking for that internal stability, it's better lateral lunges or something like that we can pair with it, because now we've stepped too far over trying to use stability as a driving factor. But I think a lot of times it'll come back to the sensation as that infinite feedback loop that people are looking for, that this is hard, that must mean I'm getting a big stimulus or getting a big impulse that I'm trying to drive, and I'm getting a better adaptation from this because it's harder, rather than actually looking at what the intention should be of an exercise.
My thing is always the tiebreaker just comes down to load, right? Like, if at a certain point they put that band around and people increase the 20-30% and we're able to move the pin up, like, okay. But in all likelihood, this is bucketing in with the the hinge RDL band around the waist exercise, where you're likely decreasing load on an exercise, which that's really going to be the number one determinant of how successful any customization, internal stability, modification, optimization pursuit would be. If you're modifying it to make it more loadable, probably the right modification, or at least a step in the right direction. If you're modifying it and your modification is reducing overall load, then you're probably taking a step in the wrong direction. I think there's something to be said for creating a sensory proxy to stimulus, which is useful, right? Like, it's okay to teach people how to feel things as long as we can then move objectively through that sensation and not chase a subjective increase in that sensation. Like, I was thinking about this the other day. The progressive overload conversation or debate continues on, and it's like, at this point, I'm too old and I don't give a rat's ass. But it's like, we were training the other day and like going through some shoulder shit from missing a bunch of things that should be attached and aren't attached. And we hit the same amount of, we hit a slight increase in volume, and a decrease in pain. So for me, that's progressive overload. The weight stayed the exact same as the week before,
100%.
but it's like, that was definitely progressive overload. Because I'm tying that sensory piece in to a proxy of performance that is, as closely tied to a, call it subjective, call it objective, interpretation of actual tissue tension, right? Like, I know if I feel less pain, those reps were probably loading more tension on the target tissue, even though there was only like one or two more reps, and the actual load itself, right? So this is like this idea of progressive overstimulus. Again, if you see that word online, that definitely started at this fucking table. So, that. It's just old man yells at cloud. That's going to be the new podcast. But, that to me is progressive overload, right? Because I'm thinking about the actual physiological adaptation at the level of the muscle. It's like, I did the same amount of weight, slightly more reps and less pain. The more weight and less pain, or more reps and less pain, that's like twofold win in a week, right? So rather than like coming in with my 2.5 kilo plates and going like, oh shit, I got to beat the book and I got to use, little glute mini bands to make these dumbbells 82.5 pounds per side or whatever, right? I just did the same amount then I did a couple more reps, and I did some things that I thought would make my shoulder feel a little bit better, and it did. And my mind's eye is like, I'm using those two things as a proxy for the thing that matters, which is how much stimulus am I putting on the target tissue that I'm trying to train. So increase in reps, decrease in pain, big win, but no objective overload as far as like how much weight, but an overstimulus nonetheless. Progress was made.
Well, and I think that's a parameter that is underutilized in our industry, is the concept of movement efficiency. Is, whether exactly what you're describing, like if you're using different metrics, if there's a pain metric that has decreased, even though the load and the reps are exactly the same, if you're executing it more efficiently, it's going to be a difference in the depletion of the energy sources that you're using, because you know how to move better, you know how to move more efficiently. And just that neurological adaptation that can come with it, and better understanding how to move your body through space and time. There's a lot to be said that I think is left on the table a lot of times, that's underutilized in how people approach progression. Because it's always upfront kind of taught as rep, sets, and load.
Yeah, but I think you mentioned it when you were talking about that, like your pain was less. Like, that is the movement efficiency there.
Yep.
It's like having almost like I don't want to say an objective metric because it's subjective with pain, but you got to have something that kind of like ties into a movement efficiency, because no one's movements are ever the exact same. And this was what, like, I have a gripe with movement efficiency to a certain degree, because every rep is not the same ever. No one's rep is the same. I've never seen anyone perform the exact same rep the same way in a set. It doesn't happen.
Yeah. But again, I think there's a more granular conversation. When skill level again comes into play, because there are some machines, like I've seen people like right hand to God sit on a quad extension and be like, "We're gonna try and clean this up in the next few sessions."
Yes.
Like, clean what up? Are you fucking retarded?
Yeah.
It's a quad extension. Like, you've completely lost the plot. Like, that language, like we've used that language. in situations where movements were more complex. And where
it's appropriate.
Well, and let's define complexity. Complexity is the presence of external stability. More complex, less externally stabilized, right? So we were working on trap bar rows the other day. We're like, okay, single arm dumbbell rows. We're working at the end of the rack. There's not much we can do. So we push them further and further down. So we started doing pull-ups first, and then we started doing pull-ups, and then we wanted a heavier row or more loadable row variation. And it's like, I wanted power. I don't want isolation because that's a shitty exercise to isolate. So we're like, all right, I want to get some like body English behind this, like slight knee extension, hip extension. Just move it like you were 16 years old. And the first, like that fluency of movement was not there the first session, right? Like the timing of extending the knee and extending the hip in an efficient way to assist in elbow extension or shoulder extension and scapular retraction was not just congruous. It was like fucking robots. I looked like a goddamn dolphin using a payphone. It was insane. And I was like, this is how unskilled I am because I've been sitting on machines for the better part of a couple of years, that this level of coordination, albeit in the grand scope of coordination, is very low. It's still my limit. I'm like, all right, this is an exercise that I'm just going to have to like practice. And a lot of the strength gains we've made in this first couple of weeks have been, like what Thayer was saying, movement efficiency.
Yes.
Do I give a fuck? No, the weight's heavier, right? So it's like mission accomplished. That's really what I'm after, because the exercise isn't some direct specific pursuit on, muscle isolation. It's more about like systemic integration, right? Like I just want a lot of load on my skeleton. Like that's really the bottom line. And I think stemming from this comes another principle that I think people are losing, is the difference between direct and net forces. You apprise me, and Cass reached out to me. Maybe we'll get him on the podcast one day. But Cass reached out to me one day, and he's like, dude, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. I'm arguing the validity of shrugs on the internet. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm grateful for your brand of autism, but mine is a different breed, because I can't do what you're doing. Like, you're doing the Lord's work. And I had a chat with him. I was like, dude, for all I know about exercise, for what it's worth, I got your back. And he went along his way, and it was all good. But I was like, how the fuck are we at a point where we're debating the validity of shrugs to grow traps? Like that, I thought that ship went out with like the sky is blue and water is wet. Like, what the fuck is happening here? And I think the idea is we've gone so down this fiber orientation line and pull way of training that we just forget that net forces, indirect net forces on like a scapula pulling your shoulder blade off your rib cage is going to cause a muscle to contract, probably maximally and probably eccentrically and lengthen, and all those great things that happen when you stretch a muscle under load. So it's like, I think people need to be very comfortable with the idea of interpreting net forces on a muscle, because it's a little bit more abstract than interpreting direct forces, right? So here we get so into the weeds of using fucking, cosine tangent functions and Texas Instrument calculators and all this bullshit. Is mostly, and I'm talking to people in the UK.
Yeah, I agree. Oi,
cunts. Whatever. Like, yo, I wish the Queen was still alive so she could get you straight. I guarantee you, Queen Elizabeth, I think that was who it was a net forces. Like when she trained, she was not doing any line of pull.
The tan sign, the old school calculator.
Unbelievable. I'll tell you, who does that? Harry. Prince Harry doesn't. When he trains, Meghan Markle's out there calculating his line of pull like a bitch. Shit, right? Put that in your documentary. Fucking unbelievable. Ungrateful bitch. So, yeah. But you see the results. These UK kids are over there like, and meanwhile, the biggest bodybuilders in the UK are out there doing stiff leg deadlifts, barbell rows, like, Oscar and basically anyone that trains with Callum, JP, Kuba, like all. But there's this little contingent of people out there like arguing the most nonsense nuance. Like, here's why you use a cuff, because your wrist will jangly jupe or whatever the fuck. I don't know.
Jiggle,
I don't want to say it. I can't.
Fluff,
like, what are we doing here? Net forces. Like Mariusz Pudzianowski probably never did a scapular plane lateral raise in his life. What he do? He's like
picked up heavy things.
Yeah, he picked up boxes of assault rifles and ran them around Poland or whatever the fuck his training was. Like, and that's it. And what happened was the net force of the axial distraction of holding, I don't know, 300-400 pounds in each hand, and the deltoid going, oh fuck, please humerus, don't leave scapula, was enough to lengthen and load the muscle to stimulate hypertrophy. So it's like, and am I saying that doing it all the time? No, I'm saying tension relationship style, RTS based, so TOA, whatever the fuck, Texas Instrument training should just be used as a tool of load management.
Yeah, agreed.
That's all it is. Like, hey, you did a bunch of heavy farmer's carries. Don't do military press. Do a lengthened cable lateral raise. Right. But no, everyone fucking learns length tension relationships. Next thing you know, they're in a 50s black and white movie doing the singing in the rain thing, hanging off a fucking light post and doing lateral raises. It's like, what the fuck is happening here?
I think once again, it's the same thing what we've seen. Like everyone just goes too far corrected. Like they learn one principle, not even a principle. They
Not
learn
even a
system.
principle. Good catch.
They learn a system and they just take that entire system. It's like, okay, now everything becomes cuffed. Or everything becomes a single arm cable variation of every exercise. It's like, no, use that for what it's utilized for. It's like decreasing load. That's all it needs to be, and that's all it actually can be used for effectively. Everything else is useless, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. Well, it's so funny to watch people like, you know, because it's, I mean, everything just spirals off in just a goddamn shitstorm. The birds of shit are circling. It's a Trailer Park Boys reference. But one thing that gets me is like the talk of the interference effect. Right. But it's like you can't train to failure. What are you worried about interfering for? Like if you're not like, and this like high level at the brain, like if you cannot create, and this is something that like 20 years after I fuck this whole industry right off, they'll be like, oh my God, he was right. I'm going to be living in fucking, I don't know, little 2 acres in Newfoundland growing mushrooms high as fuck. And then just like someone's going to reach out to me. I'm like, no, I don't live here. I'm growing mushrooms. Fuck out of here. And it's like the ability to, you know, to generate more co-contraction will allow you to be stronger in obviously isolation or in integration, compound movements, but as well as integration. And that's where it comes from. It comes from just like building a bigger neurological engine, right? Everyone gets so tied up in like the metabolic engine, right? With like Krebs cycle and buffering lactic acid and lactate at the cell and citrulline and agmatine and beta alanine and the liver and all that's like, okay, that's second order shit, right? That's second. It's like a Porsche 918 Spider. Right? No one's worried about the gas because the electric kicks ass, right? Tesla. That's why Tesla's fucking slap. I mean, it's the equivalent of microwaving your steak, and I would never buy one of those fucking things, but it's, you know, they're fast because it's electric. It's like, well, what do you think the nervous system is, right? We're sitting here going like, well, do we put 87 or do we put Supreme in it? It's like, doesn't fucking matter. You're a Pinto with your jangly wrist cuffs. Get out of here. Bullshit. And then some guy pulls up in like a Model 3 Tesla he paid 20 grand for, and he's 0 to 60 in 0.4 seconds. Meanwhile, you got in JPL rocket fuel in your goddamn Corsica, and you're stumbling off the line. But that's what muscular co-contraction gives you. It gives you that big battery. That's why, like, when you start a powerlifting prep, your first like 2 or 3 weeks into heavy combat,
you suck.
You're fucked.
Yeah.
Dude, you feel like you just went on a bender. Like you wake up, like you can't open your eyes, like you're just achy and sore, and you're just that's fatigue. When bodybuilders talk to me about fatigue, it's like, motherfucker, you're just tired.
Yeah.
And there's a difference.
Well,
there's a difference between being tired and being fatigued.
The fatigue within powerlifting, what has to happen? It's like I used to sleep between sets on a bench.
Yeah.
It's like that's how fucked I was from the amount of load that was having to be utilized.
Well, because there's difference between recharging a battery and filling up a gas tank. That's what it is, right? And it's like the more, and I'm not saying, and it's just enough that when you that you can still use the gas powered system in bodybuilding, but it's like you need that main engine, and like that's why like Dorian Yates style training kind of works, and that's why progressive overload is more oftentimes prescribed on movements that are less externally stabilized. So it drives more internal muscular co-contraction, which requires more of that brain energy, which builds a bigger battery pack. And then when you do funnel that into, a bicep curl or a hamstring curl or a quad extension, yeah, because you operate so often in recovering, and you recover from fatigue. Like you fucking eat and drink water to deal with muscular shit. Yeah. Fatigue is like neurological to me. Tiredness is a perception, right? Like there's too much. What would it be? There's too much adenosine circulating and getting in receptors in the brain, and then caffeine can block that out. It's like caffeine does nothing for fatigue, in my opinion.
No, it doesn't.
Right? It can make you less tired, but being tired and fatigue are two different things.
Yeah, but that's why, like, to go further back to the original concept of this, like some of the biggest people that I ever saw got big come from a strength background in moving load. It's like they squat, bench, deadlift, they moved excessive amounts of weight. And then when they started doing single arm shit, the single arm shit was that much heavier than anyone else, and they just exploded. Like I thought that was like a common principle, but apparently it's not.
It's not.
But JT?
I'm just enjoying the conversation. Yeah, I think it's. I'm just so focused. All this caffeine just has me focused and it's dropped my perception of tiredness.
At the end of the day, do what makes you happy. I need that to be on the podcast. So when James Marshall clips this up and puts on some angry shit on Instagram,
You can just say
they can be like, "Well, you didn't listen to the whole fucking thing. Do whatever you want. You want to do equations." I started lifting weights because I don't like math. If you started lifting weights because you like math, you're probably just going to get better at math and worse than lifting weights. But it's the frustration comes when people's money is involved. Like, that's really what it comes down. Like, I don't like
And ego.
Yeah, but egos are tough. And I'm not, and in the interest of backpedaling to not have to deal with arguments on the internet, I'll be like, look, we all got egos. That's fine. Go to therapy, try and sort it out. But in the case of, like, you're wasting someone's time if you're training them this way. And that's where I like kind of come in and be like, okay, people need to work to make money, and things are way more expensive now, and they're opting in to use your services. There's better information out there, and you might cling to an ideology, just like, I cling to mine, but I'm constantly questioning myself. Like, I interrogate my own brain all the time, and the more I do things, and that's big. I do a lot. Like a lot, like the most ever that I can handle, I do. And then I get to talk a little bit about it. But if you just talk about it, you don't do things, or you haven't been doing things a while, then shut up. All right. So that's kind of my 2 cents is like, does it matter if you want to train that way? The fuck, do whatever, calculate, the speed of sound and light and whatever.
Things.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't give a baker's fuck. But like when people come to you like, oh, I want to get in good shape, blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden you have to like crash diet them to pull their calories because they don't have muscle mass because you deployed this less than efficient way of training. It's myopic way of training. It's like, what the fuck are we doing here? And look, the thing is, you'll come full circle, and some of these things might be the tools that you use with someone 10, 15 years down the road to manage load. You're like, fuck, this guy's just got an engine. I gotta like stop him from, I think of someone like Nick Gloff, right? Gloff is one of the strongest fucking human beings I've ever met in my life.
Yeah.
So it's like the pursuit in training him would be like, how can I even get into the gas tank, right, without just that 918 running off battery, right? Like then it's like constrain.
Yeah, you have to,
right? Because if you put him on bar, he's just gonna fucking front squat like 900 pounds, and it's like, well, what happened there? It's like he just built a bigger battery. He didn't build a bigger engine, right? So that's where you might come full circle, and you might see someone like him. And I don't know, I've followed his training for years. I still don't think he's gone full bore into like that level of constraint. But he understands his strength. He understands how strong he is in that like exercise selection around, containing the collateral that comes with managing that kind of load. But it's like, if you're managing 12 pounds, you don't need to manage any collateral.
No.
Right? Unless if you have porcelain bones, or you're osteoporotic, maybe. But your biggest focus then shouldn't be line of pull. You know what I'm saying? It should actually probably be axial load based off the research. The fuck do I know? But yeah, I don't know, man. It's tough. It's hard out there. But again, do what you like. So then
it all works. We've seen it. Look at the gym. Look at the gym we train at. Everything works.
I mean, everything. Effort is a great equalizer.
Yeah.
Right. Effort and trend.
Yeah.
Right.
Those two.
Yeah, two together. If those two together are on the table, this is a moot conversation. Then it comes down to enjoyment, because to steal a Stan Effortingism, the science is compliance, or whatever that phrase
Yeah,
is. I
science
like
is
that.
compliance. Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, true. And you'll comply with things that you like better than others. And if you like and a lot of people, they fall in love with the process. And if that process involves doing exercises you enjoy doing, that you'll keep doing, if you want to do that, then do that, especially if you're on trend and you try hard. If you're not trying to try hard, don't listen to sports science. Listen to the things that you enjoy doing. Follow the bodybuilders that you like and do what they like. Straight up. I don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
That's 100% the truth. Like but if you deal with clients who are not on drugs, and that effort needs to converge on a handful of exercises a week to drive.
Well, it has to be effective. It has to be utilized in an effective manner, and that's not going to waste their time, like you said.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
I love watching people's transformations, and I don't know if they've organized it left to right or right to left. The client transformations, I was like, and I've never seen The Office, but I've only seen the meme of like the girl, like corporate needs you to identify the difference between these two photos.
It's the same.
They're the same photos, and it's like, man,
fucked up.
Yeah, but here's the thing: you could take 2 ways of training and 2 different subjects, and you could have discernment in who pre-qualifies for which style of training. One would be maybe more like skill-based, higher output, build the engine, that kind of stuff. And then one could be like the cosine tangent function, square root of the length of the bicep over pi, or whatever the fuck. And if applied appropriately, you could both make wicked transformations when applied appropriately. Or you could take someone who's super strong, and you could channel that and manage load, not with everything, right? Yeah. Not like you take every exercise in their program and turn it into this, this direct line of pull pursuit. You stoke some of that fire, and you keep some of that high muscular co-contraction. You keep some of those heavy lifts in there, but you divert some of that attention to more like, dare I say, like metabolic-esque stimulus, more focused, more direct tension rather than net tension. And you could probably see great results with that. And on the flip side, if you take someone who's like piss weak and is cuffing everything and calculating this, the moon's gravity on the ocean tides, and Mercury's in microwave, or whatever the fuck, those are the same people, by the way. It is essentially that is turning into the astrology of fitness. And you take that person, you're like, hey, maybe we do some of these, but do them after some
Something heavy.
Yeah, and you just scale it to their skill level, like, bilateral bench supported dumbbell rows, because it's bilateral, but the dumbbell's a little bit unstable, and you're supported on a bench, so you got to do something with your feet. And then you work towards like a unilateral thing, right? And you just create a roadmap of complexity based off of the external environment driving the internal demand, and then you just kind of move people towards things that were once impossible to coordinate that now become easier to coordinate, and that level of coordination becomes a proxy to performance. And we go, oh, right, there's a bigger engine here. They're able to perform more complex skills. They're able to drive more muscular co-contraction. Now we converge that co-contraction into an isolated contraction. We just kind of steer the needle between net and direct forces, and we can just do this at however they need, whenever they need it, right? But it's like everyone just gets like very, this is my training style and this is how I do it. It's like, well, be a little bit more fluid with, be a little bit more mechanistic. That might be a better word. Like mechanistic. Understand the mechanisms at play, and then you can just.
Yeah, but it's understanding the mechanisms at play and then understanding the individual in front of you.
That's true. Yes.
So that's probably true individualization within programming, is taking a mechanistic approach to individualized training. That's what that should be. It's like if you can understand that everything works for an individual depending on what skill level, what base, what they need, and take the mechanism behind each one of these training philosophies, if you will, or the principle behind each one of these training philosophies, take that and then superimpose it in, have an index of exercises that then goes through this order of selection. It's like you're bound to get results. You shouldn't fail.
Yeah. And then that way you can have like a diverse roster of clients. Because I think what a lot of people don't equate for that thing that you just said, it's like understand the person in front of you. A lot of times the open market just sorts that out for them and only puts people in front of them that are more alike than different. And that way they end up with a roster of people that are all pretty much the same.
And they will get the same programming, get the same results.
Right, because they're the same. I mean, as close to the same person as what matters when it comes to like biochemistry and, biomechanics. And you see that a lot with like successful coaches. They just, whether they're doing it on purpose or likely their audience is self-selected for them. They just end up with the same body type morphology. Like, oh, you look a lot like so-and-so, or I look a lot like so-and-so.
Yep.
You work with so-and-so. It's like, okay, great. I'm just going to run the one play in the playbook that we use with so-and-so. And it's more closer to accurate for that person than a different coach with a different sort of key demographic. But if you want to be able to touch in and coach, someone who's 7'3", someone who's 5'6", someone who's physique figure, someone who's, dare I say, even like an athlete, because bodybuilders aren't athletes, like a real sport, you could do that too if you wanted and probably make way more money. So just saying, think about that. The individualization and like recognizing the person in front of you is going to leave like way more doors open, because it's going to pose better questions for you to then pose to ChatGPT and then give you better answers. So I don't think it's necessary. It's not hard if you think about it. The hard part is thinking is hard. Representative from the state of Kansas has the floor. Closing remarks.
You've left me speechless. I mean, I think at the end of the day, I say that and then I go off, but at the end of the day, just kind of that ending point is like understanding the individual and being able to adapt your training around their needs. You don't have to lose the principles, because the principles always apply, but again, that individualization, the better understanding, that's going to get the best results for that person. And if coaches can take that approach, even how simply it's put in that statement, they'll give that individual better results, but they'll also open up a lot more opportunities in who they can train and not have to just fall into a niche subgroup. It's because all the adaptability in that, where sometimes it might speak to a coach that's unable to apply those principles across the board. That's why they're limited in clients. And so just, again, looking at how you can take the intention behind the program that you're creating for that person and apply it and adapt that in your own coaching to find those results.
Yeah. I think for every time you say something to a client and cue them into a position or cue them out of a position, think about a case where you would cue them the exact opposite. Like I saw two really interesting, we were going through and just appraising people in our industry, which is like such a shitty thing to do. But I think we were doing it with some level of academic curiosity, because like, am I missing something?
Yeah, that's what it was.
Right. And then like we saw this one gentleman who was trying to train the mid back. And if this gets too close to home, tell me to stop. But if not, I don't give a fuck. I'll tell everyone my home address. You can stop by anytime. With training the mid back without moving the scapula. And then I scrolled to this other page after like looking at the thing that Mac and I were looking at. We're like, hey, that's really interesting how you could think that works. Like and we've arrived at a laughable conclusion, because we're like, well, this person started moving their scapula, and wouldn't you know that the muscle that attached to the scapula started to grow.
Bro.
Yes. But then I was like, well, I scrolled through and there's a page I really like, and I'm gonna give the dude a shout out. Very very interesting page if you're into the neuro side. Very smart dude. Fuck off phone. God, this stupid thing. Okay. And then so it's integrated kinetic neurology. And he had this video about the rotator cuff, and super, like, guy's really smart. So he's doing like a banded external rotation with the rotator cuff.
Yep.
And then he does this thing where he puts in a dowel on the hand. You'll see here in a second. So notice he puts the dowel to anchor it on the floor, because that minimizes how much the scapula moves. Because in this case, he is trying to rehab a rotator cuff. So having the dowel on the floor and the band around the wrist or in the hand allows it, and he used the word quiet the scapula. It's like, great. Yeah, that's not a bad idea if someone who's trying to isolate. So like, whenever I see, okay, the meta principle that we were questioning here was like scapular movement. And this is something that's debated in bench press and muscle isolation and with lat movements and all that stuff. So I saw it in one. It was like, okay, well, scapula is not moving here. And Mac and I both agreed that for the pursuit that this person was going for, which is like mid-back hypertrophy, the scapula should move. My immediate thought was, what am I missing? When is the opposite true? when is it good for the scapula not to move? What is the desired outcome? And then it just so happened, I like opened my Instagram and I saw integrated kinetic neurology, and I saw it. I don't know the guy's name. I feel bad. He's a solid dude. And I saw him going through this rotator cuff drill where he was trying to limit movement of the scapula. Like a weaker rotator cuff was then being taken over by more scapular movement, and they weren't able to actually strengthen it. And I was like, so do that. And that's like steel manning an argument. So whenever you see that, be like, well, what is the case for when it's true? So contextually, when it comes up, you can be like, well, not here, but maybe here, here, and here. Because a lot of people just don't do that. They don't question anything. And then they end up just following blindly, and then they don't end up with principles. They end up with like protocols or systems. Yeah.
Templates.
Fuck, man.
I mean, and that's the principle behind debate. It's understand the opposing side, the references and points that they're going to create so you can counter those. And in that thought process, I think a lot of times that's what we try to highlight in courses and labs, is taking a step or two deeper in your thought process, and don't get stuck into a systems way of thinking, but the principles and seeing where that it applies, because it's that very question of, it's not just when this applies, but also when it doesn't. When is this proven wrong, that we have a better understanding of the landscape to make more informed decisions? It's looking at not good or bad, it's appropriate, and when it's not appropriate, to make those decisions and considerations around how we're going to individualize it to that person. That's why variations can be so crucial, because going in with a person, one exercise might not be appropriate for them, but having something that is less skilled or more skilled gives a trainer options to be able to make those decisions and get the best results for that person. So I think, something that probably started with you in the conversations around PSL1 is like, just think, like try thinking, I think is one of the old things that you used to use.
Yeah. Try trying too. Try trying. Okay, I could beat this horse over again, but we're not going to do it. We're done. I'm just tired, man. I'm just
like
really
actually tired,
like physically tired. Yeah,
like actually
tired. Programming.
Yeah.
Segue. This is actually perfect, because this is going to launch on the day.
No, day before.
Programming releases. So we usually keep courses up for sale going a week. So this will still be up on the homepage at www.pre-script.com. Exercise programming course. Tell us, brother James's. Give us a rundown.
So I'll kind of start. But like the thought process behind it, whenever we first started in these discussions, something we kept coming to is we looked at people that have been in the industry for a while and coaches just coming into, and one of the common things that every coach is going to use is programming. Like that's the whole essential of how we actually work with people. But noticing new people coming into the space and learning, or within their first couple of years, a lot of it was lacking in experience, in context, obviously. And so looking to a course that we could apply some principles to provide some context. And then on the other side of the spectrum, looking at coaches and trainers that have been in it for a long time, but reestablishing those principles and understanding to give better criterion to how they can program, and essentially how they can become a better coach for their clients through those principles.
Yeah, the long-term approach within the programming principles course is also the big thing that we try and highlight. It's like, if we can understand these principles, whether you're new or an older trainer, and how they allow you to kind of look long-term and then work yourself backwards from that long-term goal to essentially create the phases, was kind of like a term that we came up with, and go take a client through phases, allows for better results within clients, better results in terms of like what's it called when you keep a client?
Retention.
That's the word. Retention within clients. So it's like, unfortunately, this is a business. You need to make money. You can't just train people for free. But retention rates is something that obviously trainers need to think about if they do want to make money long term with clients. It's like, you have a roadmap. You have the ability to think long term with your clients, but also be very specific and have intentions around training them right here and now. So that's a big aspect or big concept around the programming course, the principles programming course. And then the one that we've constantly see within the programming course is going through intakes. Assessments. It's like assessments, like you said, it's like if you can ask better questions, we can essentially create better answers. So if we can take you through how to go through an assessment with a client, you're going to be able to program more effectively. You're going to be able to take the mechanical approach, mechanisms.
Mechanistic?
That's the word I'm looking for.
2 for 2.
Approach, 2 for 2. Language is hard. Mechanistic approach into this individualization of a client, and essentially long term just get them much better results.
Yeah, that.
Yeah.
On the website right now, www.pre-script.com, programming. Sign up. Classes start tomorrow. So fucking get your ass in there. All right, cool. JT, appreciate you.